For me, the title has been Being, Living, Knowing. I just mentioned this because I will go from one to the other. It doesn't matter that much, but nonetheless, that's how it is. And in fact, I am deeply grateful to Professor Manisha Pandey for having invited me to offer the concluding lecture, which is indeed an honor, and for having been there for me throughout what was for me a difficult time. I had COVID, recovered, and slowly worked myself into a life that got extremely complicated, and she was right there. I am honored, of course, that the Vice Chancellor, Professor Najma Akhtar, agreed to chair the occasion, and I'm certainly aware of her work in education, and this puts us together because, in whatever way, I can't say well or ill, my life more or less has been devoted to the idea and practice of education. Happy 100th birthday, Jamia Millia Islamia, our treasured place. I'm very aware of the grandeur of the university, and also I have been at Jamia in person a number of times. I want to come back there as soon as possible. I am, in fact, particularly delighted to be invited to speak at the Department of Sociology. English was my home from 1957 to 1962. I had wanted to be a physicist, but thank God I failed the mathematics exam for entering Presidency College. And in those times, it was Presidency College or nothing. And so I said to myself, I came first at the university in English without really trying. They can't not get me in. So this was the dubious reason for my moving into English. But soon I realized that I'd done the right thing. So it was my home from 1957 to 1962. In 1962, and I will tell you the story, I stepped into comparative literature, English, French, and German. In 2007, I received the undeserving honor of a responsibility for the humanities as a whole. This, for me, has come to mean the humanities beyond the discipline. The discipline of the humanities tightens humanities into a package. That's not where it should be. Given this history, any recognition from the social sciences seems an unexpected prize. So thank you very much indeed. In October 2018, I was invited by the Center for Social Studies at the University of Coimbra in Portugal, the oldest university in Europe, to give the inaugural lesson for the first batch of PhDs. Again, I was charmed that they had thought to ask a teacher of the humanities for this important occasion, speaking about the fact that Professor Najma Akhtar is the first gender female vice chancellor. I should say that I'm tremendously intellectually insecure. This is ridiculous. After all, I've been teaching for so long that I shouldn't be so terrified, but I am, because although my parents were totally a kind of pre-feminist, feminist kind of household, once I entered a co-educational college, there was such bad gendering at presidency, not among the teachers. Teachers were wonderful. Among the students, oh, Gayatri, she's not really brilliant. The teachers like her because she's good looking. I used to be. And they would say the really brilliant person is Surajit Sen. You see, this idea that I was only liked by intellectuals because I was a good-looking girl, this is the worst kind of gendering and leads to a lifetime of intellectual insecurity. You never know as to why people are saying, even now, as I'm so old and certainly not a delight to look at, I still feel, God knows, I may be just a token. But at any rate, I was charmed that they had thought, because of my intellectual insecurity, to ask a teacher of the humanities for this important occasion. My title for them was Study, Know, Learn, Hear, Listen, Do, ? Humanities for Social Studies. This was my title. This is how I explained my title to them. So, and I'll tell you a little bit about how I explained it because it relates to what I'm doing today, Humanities and Sociology. I told them that this title summarized my idea of the humanities as training in imaginative activism. I will dwell on each cognitive position, I told them. Studying, knowing, learning, hearing, listening, and then doing with a question mark. The question mark, the hard one is from knowing to learning. As you at this great university are aware, learning must be done very well. I don't have to tell you that. But there, the object of investigation is just that, an object. We learn as well as we can, all documentation, but it's the object of investigation is an object. And in my title, there was a question mark at the end after do. It is because there is no direct line from knowing to doing. There is no direct line from knowing to doing. So when we speak about diversity, we must be aware of this. The fact of an institution of knowledge which reflects diversity at a certain level does not, in fact, secure this line at all. I told my colleagues there that I would dwell on each cognitive position, that the hard one, as I just said, was the necessity to move from knowing to learning. And as I said, in knowing, the object of investigation is an object. To move to the next stage, from knowing to learning, the object of investigation must itself become something like a subject. Manisha mentioned this. The object, and I'm very glad that you actually picked up on this basic thing that I have been trying myself and not succeeding. It's hard. It's hard. But you still resist as much as you can simply the idea of knowing well. And that's what is encouraged these days with the way education is going. Speed and efficiency are encouraged. And therefore, the idea of this move, if we in the humanities don't come forward to offer this, there is no hope for social justice. At any rate, so therefore, the object of investigation must itself become something like a subject, and only that can lead to a change in practice. It's a scary moment when this happens. What do I do? Our formulaic description of the effort to make this change is a prayer to be haunted by what I'm learning, because I can't do it myself. It is like in Bengali we say bhar karo, amar upar bhar karo, haunt me. And this is a prayer, a position of mine that I'm describing this in a secular way. It's not like knowing at all, because being haunted is unanticipatable. It happened because you're working hard. And this is something that philosophers all over the world first philosophers have acknowledged. You folks have spoken about phenomenology in your Lebenswelt, life work. But in fact, think about Aristotle when he talks about the fact that we can only go through mimesis very, very carefully. And by chance, tuhe, perhaps it will become poiesis. This thing, to be haunted, is unanticipatable, and it's not periodic. You can't make it happen. You can only try. So this, our formulaic description of the effort to make this change, is a prayer to be haunted by what I'm learning. And diversity is the thing that we are learning for the next few minutes in this way, what humanities can offer. Being haunted is not anticipatable. It happens if it happens. The humanities, and for some, it never happens. They remain imprisoned within the discipline. The humanities, I wrote to my colleagues at Coimbra, emphasize the cognitive variations reflected in the title I gave them. I must learn not only to listen to diversity, but hear it. There is a difference between listening and hearing. You hear something, even if you're focused on something else. Listening is more focused. But this prayer to be haunted is where that opens up into a hearing, which is, I'm describing these with these abstract words. But when you are doing it, it's a different kind of scene altogether. But here, I will describe it as best as you can. I must learn not only to listen to diversity, but hear it. And that takes time. I will be reading right at the end Mati by Shankha Ghosh, and we will hear a poetic representation of hearing the diverse, not just carefully listening, which is important, but hearing is when your own subjective focusing is relaxed because the diverse is becoming a subject in itself rather than simply something that you can tabulate and praise yourself for. My explanation of the title went just a little further on that occasion. In globality, I said, old sociocultural habits have returned. I believe my very dear friend Lakshmi Subramaniam is actually attending this event, and this particular remark actually came out of something that she and our dearest friend, Professor Hari Vasudevan, the three of us, did together called Radiating Globality. We moved around, and this is something that came out of that effort. And I remember, Hari, as I'm giving this talk, because really the work was collective, not just me. I just mentioned that. So I said, in globality, old sociocultural habits have returned. The colonial experience was short-lived. The beginnings of post-coloniality was a slow loss of the results of that experience. I might add for this particular occasion today that in our case, the case of India, and remember, my only passport is Indian, so I speak as an Indian. I have a 60-year-old green card for the United States. The colonial experience was short-lived. The beginnings of post-coloniality was a slow loss of the results of that experience. I might add for this particular occasion, which I certainly didn't say it in Coimbra, that in our case, the case of India, it was the loss of an imposed idea of democracy moving to a theocracy and a general return to feudality within a market economy, which is a very difficult thing. I mean, one doesn't know what to do with it. General return to feudality within a market economy, in other words, governance by loyalty to a dynasty and by hierarchy. How do we think solutions? Where is the gendered rural episteme? The humanities emphasize then the cognitive variations reflected in my title, and I will keep on repeating this. How can these variations, knowing, learning, listening, hearing, doing, question mark, how can these variations enhance work in qualitative social sciences as a means to an imaginative activism that allows for producing a general will for social justice? This pattern is what the humanities beyond the disciplines can offer to the world. In many languages, structures of feelings, which is my way of bringing what is called religious into the discussion, structures of feeling. In many languages, structures of feelings, genders, castes, and classes. As I mentioned, studying and knowing come first there. And so would it for you. These remarks, however, will come to knowing at the end and repeat in another way, I hope. My title for you is obviously a restatement of your subtitle, Plural Epistemologies and Life Worlds. Plural Epistemologies, written more simply, knowing. And Life Worlds, written more simply, living. And I have added being. Let us then begin with being. Philosophy thinking the human as animal, as part of an animal world, living in biodiversity, leading diversity. Living in biodiversity, pran boichitra. Living in biodiversity, leading upstream from the human, to the very first cell which by chance emerges out of the prebiotic soup. The contemporary charge for thinking this word in English is all of this. I bypass the awesome obligation to think of how the world's wealth of language would think or not think the word. Plural epistemologies, indeed, different ways of knowing. If you think about the world's wealth of languages, there's the first break. The mother as honor, the daughter as reproductive right. And this in all languages of the world. The Oxford English Dictionary's definition of diversity seems unable to cope with this richness. And I want to mention it again. Philosophy thinking the human as animal, as part of an animal world living in biodiversity, where diversity begins, leading upstream from the human to the very first cell which by chance emerges out of the prebiotic soup. This is the contemporary charge that we've understood as our world is destroyed around us. The Oxford English Dictionary's definition of diversity is unable to cope with this richness. In Bengali, we have called this pran boichitra, biodiversity. In Urdu, my colleague and friend Manan Ahmed gives me tanaw, but I thought that meant tension. I don't know why he gave me that. And Franny Pritchett, who certainly knows Urdu backwards, she didn't respond to me. So I let you fill out that part. In our impoverished context, obliged to take English as an unmarked language, I love English, but that doesn't mean it's unmarked. Obliged to take English as an unmarked language, I would say that in thinking being, diversity carries a performative contradiction. In order to perform it, you have to inhabit a contradiction. Because in thinking being, we must think unity, equalness. Yet, in today's call for a horizon structure for cellular diversity, we must insist on what has always been true, equal, but not the same. This double bind, to think unity, but not the same, is to celebrate diversity within the broadest, indeed an infinite horizon, to acknowledge that difference animates the very question of being. If, however, we zoom in to consider the facts of today, we have to acknowledge that generally diversity today means the inclusion of minorities. As you might know, in the country of my residence, the United States of America, country of my residence and my full-time work, the United States of America, this has become increasingly difficult over the last 5 years. Indeed, it has always been relatively difficult. And there, as a visible minority, I mean, here in India, I am a part of the 86% often violent majority. But there, I am a visible minority. I fight this exclusion, the exclusion of the minorities. Not so much for myself as for others, although I too suffer from this in ways that will surprise you. I'm not free to discuss these ways, but they're quite interesting. They will surprise you. Yet, when we are patronized by well-meaning affirmative action, which creates a historically justified double standard for us minorities, I must also fight it, celebrating the right to refuse an easy PhD. When there is violence, however, in the immediacy of disaster, this double bind disappears. You see, young people quite often misunderstand me and think that I'm stopping them from going abroad and prospering. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'll talk a little bit about myself in order to make you understand where I'm coming from. I have been working on W.E.B. Du Bois, the greatest sociologist of the last century, for the last couple of decades. Indeed, one can say that with his Philadelphia Negro, published in 1899, Du Bois invented urban sociology. Now, I'm hearing all kinds of noises. Someone has to mute himself or herself. One can say that with his Philadelphia Negro, published in 1899, Du Bois invented urban sociology. Nothing like this had existed before. Du Bois was trying to make sociology diverse. Imagine the quote Negro, unquote, as the word was at that time. Imagine the Negro as a human being. Don't just know them. But sociology alone could not do it. With his next book, Souls of Black Folk, Du Bois enters the humanities. Just for the context, I mark here the fact that Du Bois was at home with India's struggle for independence. Here is a book on Gandhi's 75th birthday, presented to him by Nehru, to be found in the core collection that he took to Ghana in 1961 at the age of 93. You see just one shelf of that collection. This reference to my current work on Du Bois now for some decades brings me to the second part of my title, For You. Living, a rewriting of your word, life world, which comes to us from German phenomenology via French, as in Maurice Merleau-Ponty, down now to Habermas. As you know, Husserl's life world contained the most powerful thinking. I'm just talking about the word you chose. Husserl's life world contained the most powerful thinking of Sinne, or sense, which contains the idea of being turned towards something. I'm always knowing or learning something. That's Husserl's extremely powerful notion of Sinne. For Husserl, life world thinking was animated by Sinne, which was noematic. In other words, someone thinking something. You could not approach something without the structure. I obviously cannot give you my Sinne. It is for you. See, that's the responsibility of the listener or the reader, not just accepting what I'm saying. This is Husserl. I obviously cannot give you my Sinne. It is for you, the reader or listener, to work it out. Learning, not just knowing what I'm saying, but learning. Now, this is absolutely implicit in Husserl, especially in his terrifying final fragment, Origin of Geometry, which he never published, and he wrote in 1959, 1939, when, as a converted Jew, he was not allowed to be entering his university. He was not allowed to approach his library, his office, and his own research assistant, Heidegger, denied him. That was when the terrifying fragment was written. And so Husserl knew something about what we are talking about, diversity. I give you my account for you to interpret. I want to share, therefore, with you my most marked childhood experience, because childhood is when we are formed. In my estimation, this is my Sinne, my noema, the vector of my epistemology. Everything I say to you will be marked by this, but it is for you to see if this works. That's Husserl. You have chosen the word Lebenswelt, life world. Okay. So I want to share with you my most marked childhood experience: riot and famine. I have no pictures of the riot. I started school in September 1946. In October, the schools closed and the riots began. We lived on the cusp of Sayyid Amir Ali Avenue and Old Baliganj Road. I hear the cries now: Har Har Mahadev, Allahu Akbar, and a machete strike. I cannot find social justice in any named religion. I respect the prophets, they are ecstatics. But once institutionalization begins, the possibility of political mobilization and the forgetting of diversity can also begin. I keep hoping that if he had lived, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, that supreme rationalist, would have explained that Buddhism was not free of this, but he did not live long enough. As we now know from Myanmar, Thailand, Sri Lanka, one can take a stand against this, always with a question mark. This allows me to celebrate CRPH, Committee Representing Union Parliament in English, in Myanmar, starting with its promise for justice for Rohingyas and other minorities, welcoming diversity as equal but not same, unafraid of death. Will it last? If we had time, I would discuss David Rodiger's profound idea of the fragility of what he calls revolutionary time, a time when all kinds of things are heightened. But when things settle down, things seem to lose that kind of urgency. My parents, Shivani and Paresh Chandra Chakravorty, were plain living, high-thinking nationalist intellectuals, anti-casteist, anti-communal. Of the many lullabies we fell asleep with, one went as follows: Osthimangsho med shonite shakol sharir hoy gathon, ek atmaram biharentaye, ke Hindu hai ke Javan. We fell asleep to this as children. All bodies are made of bone, flesh, lard, and blood. The same soul finds its dwelling there. How can you tell a Hindu or a Muslim? Actually, the word for Muslim here is Yavana, Javan in Bengali, which originally meant Ionian, Yavana, or Greek, a thinking of corporeal unity. Corporeal unity. How is the body made? As a vessel for the soul. That is being. Diversity is an unrecognizable moment in there. Since 1984, the tremendous impact of Zafrullah Chaudhuri, Farida Akhtar and Bangladeshi feminism, and Farhad Mazahar and Lalon Shah has marked this. There are many stories to be told here, but I will do no more than cite a song of Lalon's that I have sung many times with the Noya Krishi folk in Dhaka and Kustia, where Lalon is buried. And of course, the work with and for the Rohingyas. And I want just to show a little bit of that work and then go to Lalon. This is at Oxford upon the request. I don't do this usually, but it was the request of the male Rohingya activists and Shapon Adnan. I see the Surya hasn't broken his name. In the first name Shapon, last name Adnan, from Bangladesh, is also in the picture. He's the guy wearing trousers, a very dear friend of mine. But in front are the Rohingya activists who wanted me to walk forward and hold this, and so I am. And then I have also a picture of what's happening to them today, the fire that is destroying them now. I mark the moment for the work with and for the Rohingyas, which has been part since 1984 of my life. I am, in fact, a citizen ambassador for the Free Rohingya Coalition. Work hard. Now here is Lalon. Here's the poem, the song. I wish I could sing it, but I can't sing anymore. Mukhe podbe sadai la ilaha illallah. Ain bhedilen Rasulullah. Namero sohit rupo dhyane rakhiya japo. Be nishanay jodi dako. Kemne chinibe Allah. Siraj Sai, tai koi pukari, tuire lalon belilla. So I translate. Tell non-stop there is no God but God. God's messenger sent the law, but with the name, keep the form in mind and chant. If you call without a sign, Benishana, if you call without a sign, how will you know him? How will you know God? Kemne chinibe Allah? And then the whole song, which I don't cite, and right at the end, that's why my teacher Siraj Sai, says loudly, Koi Pukari, Lalon, you're godless, Lalon, Tuire Lalon Belilla, grassroots syncretism transformed into poetry, diversity acknowledged, and its orthodox rejection acknowledged in the teacher's name. As I said, I could produce many stories here, but to share my zine with you, I have come rather far from my childhood formation by way of the Hindu-Muslim riots of 1946. That was a conflictual coexistence, living with diversity as part of worldliness. That's how we were in that part of the world, suddenly politically mobilized into violence. And it happens. Famine had a more visible presence. Skeletons crawling to the door, the childhood experience of how I look at diversity. Skeletons crawling to the door with the croak, Kandama, mother, a bit of starch, and bodies on the pavement. I put in here an ugly picture readily available online. The World Health Organization says that even the middle class eating rationed food was seriously malnourished. And I, therefore, have bad bones. And we ate 2 meals a day from the ration shops. I learned this from a sports doctor in California when I cracked my shin in a stress fracture running. He was not of Indian origin, just a regular man. To translate this into our diversity code, Winston Churchill did not acknowledge the diversity of his empire and thought we Bengalis were not human. Another example from my Lebenswelt. As I said, Surya, you can, yes. As I said in my English department valediction on the 17th, I left India suddenly because I had been very critical of the university as editor of Presidency College magazine, and Taraknath Sen told me that I had jeopardized my chances for a first class in my MA. Only 2 sentences. আমাদের কলেজের স্নাতকেরা যখন সরকারের দৃষ্টি আকর্ষণ করা প্রয়োজন, first of all, we need to I was 18 years old. We need to draw the gaze of the government towards these problems. When our BAs step into the university, then কিছু কালের মধ্যেই তাদের শিক্ষার আগ্রহ উদ্যম বিক্ষিপ্ত হয়. In a little while, their desire to learn and effort is totally, what would I say, বিক্ষিপ্ত. It doesn't remain unified, if you like. প্রেসিডেন্সি কলেজের নিবিড় অধ্যাপক ছাত্র সম্পর্কের পরিবর্তে, in exchange for the deep relationship between professor and student at Presidency College, তারা একটা ভয়াবহ ব্যক্তি নিরপেক্ষতার সম্মুখীন হন. They confront a terrifying neglect of the personal. এই কথা কোনো অংশেই অতিশয়োক্তি নয়. This is not in any way an exaggeration. গত প্রতিষ্ঠাত্রী দিবস সভায়, in the meeting that we had, Foundation for Foundation Day, এই অস্বস্তিকর পরিস্থিতির জন্য কলিকাতা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়কে ব্যাপকভাবে দায়ী করা হয়. Because this uncomfortable situation, Calcutta University was made broadly responsible. কিন্তু বোধ করি এ বিষয়ে সরকার আপন অধিকার দাবি করলে বিশ্ববিদ্যালয় সে দাবি নিশ্চয়ই মেনে নেবে. But I think that if the government actually claims its rights with reference to this event, then the university will undoubtedly acknowledge the claim. I was a brave girl. I was 18 years old. This is 1960. I was born in 1942. But there we go. Just a few sentences, not a lot. But Tarak Babu said to me that I had jeopardized my chances for a first class in my MA. My father was long dead, and I was doing 5 tuitions, as we say, in Bengali Creole. I took out a loan from an unknown person on a so-called life mortgage, which I'm sure didn't exist at that point, but I didn't even know what collateral meant, and certainly had none. And he did make me sign a document. That's also a long story, which I won't tell. I am moving toward diversity. I went to Cornell, applying on a trunk call. That is also an interesting story, but I have no time for it. The second year, because my native language was not English, remember, first class first in English from the University of Calcutta, but because my native language was not English, I received no financial aid. I was 20 years old. I had no visa, no work permit. I was about to be deported, and I was saved by chance because Professor Paul Deman had one fellowship which he hadn't yet filled, and he would have lost it. He told me later that he was taking the chance because cultural difference would have taken care of it if I had not come through. In other words, the United States Humanities Academy had not yet learnt diversity. It was 3 years before Lyndon Johnson took off the quota system and changed the Alien Registration Act, and there was 500% Asian immigration. The well-known brain drain. Diversity became a recognizable issue. I'm not sure that I'm ready to celebrate diversity, although you must. If any of you here have read my essay on James Coetzee's Disgrace, you will know my views. I suggested in that essay that I wanted to translate Opoman as disgrace, and proposed that word in the translation of Tagore's powerful poem, Hemor Durbhagadesh, Jader Korecho Opoman, Opomane hote habe tahader sabar saman. Oh, my hapless country, you will have to be equal in disgrace with those you have disgraced. Acknowledgement of diversity, necessary in shared disgrace. Equal but not same. The performative contradiction of diversity in being shared in mourning. I believe India is ready for that collective acknowledgement from below. We can feel the earth shaking. Remember, I am Indian. I'm going to India now on the 31st to my schools, and then again, because 26th is my voting day. I vote from Baliganj constituency. Acknowledgement of diversity in shared disgrace, equal but not same. I believe India is ready for that collective acknowledgement from below. We can feel the earth shaking. A spectre is haunting India for the sake of winning back our multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural, diversely religioned place, and we must go beyond the disciplines, beyond the protection of the academy, into this place as Indians. Let us move to knowing as our life world, our Lebenswelt, rearranges itself. Jamia Millia Islamia, as I said, one of our treasures, is one of the few elite universities in India. So we must ask, how do we know this? Moving from knowledge to learning, so that doing with a question mark flows out into a collectivity. You have already shown us this, Jamia Millia. But can we hear you? To make hearing possible, Antonio Gramsci wrote as follows: sitting in political prison, sick and dying, in a cardboard notebook, in a neat hand. The mode of being of the new intellectual can no longer consist in eloquence, which is an exterior and momentary mover of feelings and passions, but in active participation in practical life. I mean, there he is. He never emerged from the prison. He died. I remember what the public prosecutor was supposed to have said as he was imprisoned without charge, that this mind must not be allowed to think for the next 20 years. He defeated the prosecutor. He thought, he wrote his notebooks, and we are still learning. So the new intellectual must be in active participation in practical life as constructor, organizer, permanent persuader, and not just a simple orator. From technique as work, one proceeds to technique as science, which means knowledge, of course, in these romantic languages. Technique as work, one proceeds to technique as knowledge, and to the humanistic conception of history. There he goes. Learning to hear, to know the other so the other responds, such is the responsibility of the new intellectual. Before PRISM, Gramsci was using the word gnoseological, too easily translated epistemological. And I mention this because you talk about epistemologies. I have offered readings as follows. Gnoseological is the logic of gnosis, knowing, a word fragment that is still in colloquial English use, diagnosis, prognosis, words related to healing or the impossibility of healing, the double bind of healing. Gnoseological, learn to talk the talk well. Epistemological, learn to reimagine myself as knower and the object of knowing as knowable in order to try to walk the walk, not just talk the talk, but walk the walk. There's Gramsci, there we are, India is shaking. Let us overhear Shankar Ghosh hearing, reimagining himself as knower and moving in to learn. It is my great good fortune to have the affection of Pratima and Shankar Ghosh. Shankar has read my account of his poem and approved it. Let me move to it now. Within the tremendous destruction of citizenship in India today, through the deployment of such absurd acts such as the Citizenship Amendment Act or instruments such as the National Citizens Register, geared to the goal of constituting India as a Hindu nation, that lie behind these the events where we stand, a poem written by Shankar Ghosh more than a decade ago has reasserted its power for this future, Mati or Earth. I remind the reader of Marx's conviction that revolutionary content comes, and I quote, from the poetry of the future. Here's the poetry of the future. The protagonist of Mati is human in our sense, not just a victim, but a carrier of the essence of democracy, which is other people, not just my rights. You will hear it in the line translated, "The world is my guest, Duniya Amar Mehman," toward the end of the poem. Shankar is a caste Hindu. By line 7, you realize with the word mahfil that he is trying to speak as a Muslim. And right at the end, bringing in the metaphor of society as a trial by fire, where the protagonist would have to prove a relationship to the earth. In open court, there is a distinct feminization of the poem's voice as a Muslim Sita on fire trial by Ram, the king of modern India. There is a shal forest in the poem and the mention of the river Ajoy. This is an area where I have been active. Manisha mentioned this, for a few decades, even when Shankar was composing his poem. I show you, therefore, a selfie of the Shal forest taken by one of my supervisors, Dhananjay Lohar, a Dalit with a high school education, on December 29, 2019, as we were traveling from school to school through the forest. Now, the poem.
মাটি আমারই হাতের স্নেহে ফুটেছিল এই গন্ধরাজ, যে কোনো ঘাসের গায়ে আমারই পায়ের স্মৃতি ছিল, আমারই তো পাশে পাশে জেগেছিল অজয়ের জল, আবারও সে নেমে গেছে আমারই চোখের ছোঁয়া নিয়ে। কোণে পড়ে থাকা ওই দালানে দুপুরে ভাঙা থামে আমারই নিঃশ্বাস থেকে কবুতর তুলেছিল স্বর, শালবন পেরোনো এ খোলা মাঠে মাহফিল শেষে স্যার আমারই পাশে শুয়েছিল প্রতিপদে চাঁদ। তোমাদের পায়ে পায়ে আমারও বাড়ানো ছিল পা। তোমরা জানোনি তাকে, ফিরেও চাওনি তার দিকে। দুধারে তাকিয়ে দেখো, ভেঙে আছে সবগুলি সাঁকো। কোনখানে যাবো আর, যদি আজ চলে যেতে বলো? গোধূলি রঙিন মাচা, ও পাড়ায় উঠেছে আজান। এ দাওয়ায় বসে ভাবি, দুনিয়া আমার মেহমান। এখনো পরীক্ষা চায় আগুন সমাজ। এ মাটি আমারও মাটি, সে কথা সবার সামনে কিভাবে প্রমাণ করব আজ?
Representative. She is no part of the large and ceaseless number of asylum seekers and labor for export that is produced by the conjuncture. She is not looking for citizenship as a protection rather than a set of rights within a collectivity, but claiming citizenship as the world's host, Dunia Amar Mehman, attempting to reclaim the ordinary, experience of the impossible in the literary. To conclude then, I have focused on two titles, one describing how the lack of continuity between knowing and doing can perhaps be undone by the cognitive variations offered by the humanities beyond the disciplines. Study, know, learn, listen, hear, do, and the other, be, live, know. In being, there is a performative contradiction between diversity and unity. In living by way of your word, Lebenswelt, life world, I have tried to present the direction of my thinking as determined by my history, my Sinne or sense, for you to read and alter. In knowing, I have given an alternative epistemology. I'm not referring, of course, to the species of superficial philosophical knowledge management of the universal that is on offer these days, travestied Hegel, as alternative epistemologies from the global south, as indeed you are not either. I'm not knowledgeable enough to work out Talal Asad's discussion of the major work of the jurist, theologian, and mystic Abu Hamid al Ghazali, to be found in his book titled Secular Translations. For the place of the poetico mathematizing subject in Nyaya and Sankhya, I refer you to the work of Arindam Chakravorty, from whom I have received a very general understanding through extensive discussion. Both of these have to be supplemented through more extensive gender considerations, although they are both gender sensitive. I did not present epistemological research as an alternative, but rather as a position. I ended with Shankhu Ghosh. I believe you have many ways to choose as you go forward for the next 100 years at least. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm absolutely speechless and spellbound. I'm sure all of you are. Thank you, Gayatri Di, for such a stimulating and such a thought-provoking lecture, which was so much empirically embedded and so live that I'm absolutely spellbound, and all of us are. Um, you know, and of course, yes, how a specter is haunting India, and how the new intellectual must be an active participant in everyday life. A lot of things to learn from, and I mean, this was really amazing. I'm sure people have many comments, many questions, many you know. But before I open the floor for discussion, I request everyone to put their questions and comments in the chat box. Gayatri Di, is there a fear of losing diversity in social life today with this these kinds of regimes which you mentioned, regimes of manufactured consent? I begin with this question, Gayatri.
Okay, can I take two more?
Yes.
Then, because I give such long answers that it's good for me to have three questions.
Okay, Professor Sabyasachi.
Yeah, Gayatri, fascinating, very deep, and very inspiring. And the strength of your argument lies in a huge amount of compassion. What I'm wondering is that as you move from studying, knowing, learning, listening, and doing, there comes a point when this haunting seems to eat into your soul. I am wondering, how does one sustain the compassion that is necessary to move across this diverse, very trying river of fire?
Okay, I'll take one more. One more.
Okay. There is one in the chat box here. Your concept of a prayer to be wanted reminds me of my indigenous colleagues talking about the value of enchantment in fighting against extractive relationships and ecological grief. Together, may these concepts help us move from knowing to doing. This is a comment, and on which if you can give your comment again, please. This is Meenal Srivastava.
Sorry, say again the name.
Meenal Srivastava.
Meena Srivastava. Okay. So yours, is there a way of losing? You see, the problem in actually, of course there is. Of course there is. That's the whole business. Manisha, sorry, I called you Meenakshi because I'm thinking of my friend Meenakshi, who's died some years ago, you know, because she and I were very, very involved in questions of diversity. But, so it's a good mistake. Okay, so Manisha, you see, there is no way of losing it. It is there. So manufactured consent cannot undo it. This is why Shanku's poem is so, I mean, it's of course impossible. Literature gives us the experience of the impossible and then moves us. But there is no way that it can be. In fact, there is always something that's going to break out. This is just, you know, I mean, look at what's happening in Burma now. They're not afraid to die. They're not afraid to die. That's what happens when you go on for that long. Say, either this will happen or we're going to die. So this, when it comes to this is what Shoboshati was talking about. When and it does come to it. That's why I said, I feel, I mean, because given the fact of my moving around and at the very lowest reaches, and also super high, there is a sense in which people share things with me. Old I may be, I'm 79 years old, but somehow I seem not to have completely grown up. So therefore, they do come. And it really, the feeling right now is a little bit different from the feeling of absolute despair before. So I will say that no, the consent can never be finally manufactured because human collectivities, especially, remember what I was talking about, cellular collectivity. There are enough people in the world today who are not going to allow the capitalization of the green. You understand? Because that is also a big thing, a big thing. So therefore, I think, no, we must keep that hope alive, because by keeping it alive, it comes alive. Because after all, we teach, don't we? You know, so that's the task of the new intellectual. And Shobosati, yes, it eats your soul, and really, that's when you feel that nothing can happen. But you know, I tell you, I don't really know you, so I can't really tell you what to think, but I will share with you what I feel has worked in the past. I mean, I became an assistant professor tenure track in the fall of 1965, as I'm happy to mention. So that's a long time of teaching for money. So I mentioned that I'm not a guru. Anybody who teaches for money is a shikak. Okay, so at any rate, in that kind of a situation, I find that one must let go and feel as much of the pain as one can. Give in to the pain. We are fortunate that we can feel pain for this kind of reason. You kick back up. See, you did if you drown yourself in in water, the general thing is that you will finally come up. So therefore, just what I said to Manisha, it's a practical suggestion. When one feels that one has lost everything, a CDR, just let it be there. Let it be there rather than deny it. Pain is also part of our affective universe. And the ability to feel pain, the ability to feel pain for this is something that we should treasure. So that's how I would say. And you see, compassion, yes, I think you're right in thinking compassion, but I don't even think compassion so much, because compassion is somewhat top down. I think of complicity being folded together in the Latin sense, being folded together rather than you see, because we can't point fingers. You see, can the subaltern speak? And Three Women's Texts. These two pieces I wrote in a finger pointing way before I began to leave the academy. Since I'm a very gendered person, I'll say it was after 21 years of terrifying marriages. Once I was free, I realized that what I really wanted to do, miasmatic, what I really wanted to do was to be useful. I confronted myself. I wasn't trying to please someone who was torturing me because of my public recognition. It's a horrible, horrible situation. But at any rate, at that point, I realized what I found was that left and right were complicit. I was complicit with the other side. And then I wrote that poem, that book, Outside in the Teaching Machine, outside in. So Can the Subaltern Speak is loved. And Three Women's Texts is much quoted because they point fingers. They allow you to feel good. They're bad, I'm good. But the discovery, so that today I say to Marxist feminists especially, outside in the funding machine, think about that, outside in the funding machine, as they claim to be revolutionaries. That's the thing that we have to think about. So compassion, I move to complicity. That's a nicer goal for me. And yes, the idea that this is now Meena Srivastava, your question, the idea of this echo concepts from the indigenous. This is a very strong idea with which we should try to have this sense of complicity that I'm talking about. But I will say, although you probably didn't mean it, because after all, you're only writing a question in a chat, whereas I'm in a privileged position of talking away, giving answers, concepts cannot help us to move into anything. That's why I said it is hard to know that the line between knowing and doing, knowledge and action, is not straight. There is no line. I'll give you a tiny example because I see that we still have some time, and then we will go into other questions. See, because I didn't do much NGO work, in fact, no NGO work, because my effort is kind of private sector volunteerism, which is not a good thing, but you have to do bad things when there's nothing else to do. But but anyway, I didn't do it, and not that NGO work is good either. But anyway, so I said to someone, Shomini Dashgupta's aunt, in fact, let's walk together from. I was younger then and walked a lot, from Dakshin Chobbish Pargana all the way up to Madhumgram to see what's happening in West Bengal. I don't know. So we walked. We had such fun. I cannot tell you. Okay, so in a place called Talikhola, there were these people who had really done something that they were very proud of, and they should be proud of. And they showed us videos, okay? They are singing and dancing with the locals, Pondebona, okay? We won't give dowries and we won't take dowries, okay? Fantastic. Okay, Now, I went to the village. I saw this in Madhugram. I went to Talikola as we walked. I did, they certainly, when there is no social security, they are not selling. I mean, we middle class people, dowries. My father didn't take dowry in 1928. He was a poor man. This is something that we still, I mean, as I said, on the English day, there was money on my mother's side, and my mother's father wanted to make him a god jamai. No, sir. So, but that's a different issue, middle class issue. But when there is no social security, I know this because I've been working with them for over 30 years. When there's no social security, they're not particularly selling anyone. The girl gives money to someone else, the guy gets money. This is, and when the son is being married, and this is Ujjwal Roy actually said to me, we claim we are BPL, below the poverty line, we can't give too much. BPL, he doesn't even know what that means. But when the daughter's getting married, we say we are APL. This is not the same thing as middle class dowry. But at any rate, so when I went there, they are dancing and singing. But dowry is happening because why were they dancing and singing? Because they dance well, they sing well. At that point, there were no televisions, no electricity. These gentle women came in and they were dancing beautifully. But that doesn't mean that any social change about dowries happened there. So, this is an innocent kind of story. But you see, concepts are not going to take us anywhere. No direct line. What you have to do is to hang in there. Try to learn from them. Remember, changes to learning. How the hell to access with your super knowledge and metropolitan super knowledge, how the hell to undo that? Not lose respect for knowing, but how to undo that so that you can actually access cognitively damaged by caste system, by us. I'm their enemy. How you can access that the cognitively damaged intelligence that's been punished for intellectual labor, recognizing that the imagination is not affected by this. So this is how one moves toward the indigenous people, rather than either claiming identity or thinking that their cultural conformity is revolutionary. It's a complicated situation, but if you hang in there, you will, or if you come to work with me, then you will see. Of course, you'll have to know Bengali well enough to teach geometry and geography and so on in Bengali from horrible textbooks. So therefore, no one can really help me easily. But Surya has learned a good deal of Bengali. But I say to him, until you can teach geometry and geography and algebra and trigonometry in Bengali to regional folks, you are not welcome in the villages because there's no place to stay. So, at any rate, therefore, I will say, Meena, that you're absolutely right to remember the indigenous, but the approach is not to look for help from concepts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gayatri Di. I'll take another set of 3 questions first. The first one is, there's one from Azhar Iqbal Mirza. In fact, it's more of an appreciation. And the question is, how do you articulate such broad concepts, observations, and ideas so well? So this is Azhar Iqbal. There is another question from Akmal Ahmed. In a globalized, top-down, philanthropy-driven world, diversity and discussion become a tokenized machinery. How does a 21st century young academic fight this dogma? Does this form a gatekeeping of intellectual understanding of the world?
Do I have another?
Yes, please. There's another one from VU. you mentioned a move from feudality in a market economy today.
Give me the name again. Give me the name again. Sorry. Give me the name.
VU. It just says VU, capital V, capital U.
Good. That's the name.
Okay.
Okay.
So you mentioned a move from feudality in a market economy today. Isn't that reason for pessimism a sign that we aren't haunted by things we ought to be?
We are not. We are not.
A sign that we are not haunted by things we ought to be.
We are not haunted by things
we ought to be. And if I take one more, if you permit.
Fine.
Yes, this is Dr. Kulbinder Kaur, one of the faculty members who's sitting here. Do you think that knowledge is a prerequisite to praxis? If not, what is the role of an intellectual today?
Knowledge prerequisite to practice. Okay, these are very practice. Well, these are extremely important questions. You know, I mean, I'm really not offering answers. I'm just trying to share these good questions with you. And so, as I said, you know, we have to think the answers together. And so, the first one, how do I articulate so well? My teachers, obviously. How do I learn? I mean, my first teachers, my parents. I mean, my parents who taught us. By the way, you know, my mother was chatta patta, okay? And choing, point, never a gut on the head because that might hurt the brain. Why and what was there? That wasn't child abuse. That was love. You know why? You know what they would say to me? They would say, you are a genius, using the English word. You are a genius. If you go bad, you will go really bad. I used to say to my mother, if she dies in 2003, Ma, suppose I take revenge now. So the thing is, it's undoubtedly. And then, you know, at school, Shukumari Bhattaji taught me English. I mean, where would I find a teacher like that elsewhere? And then at college, Lady Brabourne College, Shukumari Bhattaji. And then at school, there was Charwala Das, whom I have absolutely diocesan made me. These were Christianized, low caste so-called people. That's why my position toward colonialism is very complicated. These were folks we treated like animals, and then they offered us the kind of they offered us the kind of education. I mean, the person who taught me Sanskrit so well that I could even teach it on the graduate level would not have been allowed to even come near Sanskrit, Miss Nilima Pine. She taught me Sanskrit, and she absolutely walked into Sanskrit in that way. So that's what taught me to articulate. And then in college, there was Taraknath Sen, Subaltern, Amol Bhattaji. I mean, these were like, we never had a female teacher, except very, very strange Amy Geraldine Stock. I don't know if anybody knows. She did Yeats, etc. So anyway, so therefore, if you notice, and thank you so much for offering a word of praise, I wear it like a crown. If you notice that I do something well, it is absolutely because my teachers Taraknath Sen taught me in such a way that it articulated with demand. You know, this whole idea that a text is a staging of desire, that it does not mean that the desire is fulfilled in the text. And this is an unbelievable idea. It goes a long way. That's how I read you. That's how you should read me, I think, because I learned it from my teachers. So thank you, Azhar. Okay, so how to fight in this top-down world? You tell me. You see, I think you tell me. I mean, I don't know you. In one's own circumstances, I think what happens is that you begin to show to other people that you are serious rather than just kind of thinking I can do everything. The I can do everything attitude that I will say is not good for fighting anything. So therefore, I would say that, I started these schools. Okay, I've told this story many, many times. Why did I start these schools? I had no desire to start anything, and I knew I wanted to be useful, and I was Zafrullah Chaudhuri. Okay, let me just first say Zafrullah Chaudhuri, then I'll say I was starting schools. Zafrullah Chaudhuri, I went because, there was all of these floods happening at that time, and I heard that the international, what you call it, the international community where the rivers began would not hold a conference. So I asked Amurta, what should I do? I mean, shouldn't we do something? And he said, Gayatri, India is going to tell you, look, you're living abroad, you're doing well, just stay there, don't bother us. We are, at that point, a poor country. So I felt that I had to do something. So I did cloak and dagger, and I found Zafrullah Chaudhuri. Zafrullah Chaudhuri told last year in public, I didn't know this. He came straight from his dialysis. He says, Jafar Bhai, I tested Gayatri right from the start. I mean, nice Brahman Karna from West Bengal living in the United States has come to save Bangladesh. It is true, he was the person who first told me, Amar Shamay nei, I don't have the time to talk to you. Nobody had told me that before. I was already, 84, I was 9 years a full professor. So, so therefore, this thing of being tested, and he said last year that Gayatri passed all her tests. So that idea, and the schools were because I would go there to give money, because Maharshi Dadi had told me that the money I was making because I was lecturing on her, I should go to Rajmagar to give money. But when I gave the money, I was the way I am. I would write in the dust with twigs and I'd say, hey, you've misspelled your name. Sharathi doesn't have a Dirghoi at the end. And no, this is how you do this mathematical table. So Prashant Rakit wrote me saying, Didi, open four schools. And he gave me a little budget. And I resisted because I had no idea, no desire to get into this kind of thing, because I knew that I would never escape from this. So, after 2 or 3 weeks, I thought, what the hell, I couldn't avoid it. And it's true, it got me. So therefore, you have to convince other people that you're serious so that they ask you. I've never done anything without being asked to do it. That is also true about these Birbhum Jharkhand schools. I wait to be asked. So I'm not, because I am so top down otherwise. It's, I'm in a very superior position, metropolitan caste Hindu. So therefore, the VU, feudality in a market economy. See, I learned something from, this is, of course, it doesn't work, right? It's the self-determination of capital is the globalized capital uses this in a certain way so that we are encouraged to be feudally loyal. We are encouraged to be, and this is true about identity politics also. So this idea, feudality in a market economy, you really took the point there. See, this is the kind of thing that Du Bois writes about in terms of plantation economy, when actually that was completely out of line with the empire of cotton, about which a book has been written, right? So in fact, Lancashire cotton trade, the empire of cotton, in fact, would not tolerate, in terms of the excuse me for using old-fashioned language, self-determination of capital. I can use polite and correct language if I didn't have such long answers. So yes, Du Bois looked at that from the point of view of the self-determination of capital, there was a non-conjuncture in between plantation economy and the empire of cotton as it was developing. It is the same kind of thing here, feudality within a market economy. So that what can happen is that globalization can take place very well, so that outside we are wonderful, development, yoga, you name it, we are great. But inside, something else is going on. So therefore, I think what I would say is, just from my point of view, we are never haunted by anything. Remember, you want to be haunted by something. I mean, this is an effort. This is not, the humanities are not effortless. Everything else you can save intellectual labor by clicking a button on your computer. But intellectual labor should not be saved when it comes, just as, you can't do your body by distant learning. You have to arrange to do something with your body, with the body. It's the same way with intellectual labor. That labor should not be saved by speed and efficiency. So therefore, you can't just say, hey, there is no fit between feudality and market economy. We should actually forget this. What a small example. I say to the people I work with, what I just said to you before, I am your enemy. I'm good. My parents were good. But 2 generations do not undermine thousands of years. So therefore, you must do without me. So that to an extent, don't expect to be haunted. So, and I will tell you, anything, I don't succeed. Learn from my mistakes. I don't succeed. That's another reason why I don't take corporate funding, because I would have to lie and say there are deliverables and this and that, and you can't do this stuff in bad faith like that. So therefore, I am always surprised when something succeeds. I wish I could take an hour to tell you how my supervisor, Ujjwal Lohar, has really, Ramshi's stuff, inserting the subaltern into citizenship, making him, how he studied up to class 7, okay? Refused to pay a bribe. He's gone to Calcutta High Court. I can't say more. He is a fantastic person. And these guys are also, loyalty is what I undermine by remaining with them. If you remain with them like this, lying down with them, eating with them and everything, that kind of loyalty is shaken up a little. You earn the right to be some. How do you know this? I can't. They save my money. Okay, that's perhaps how I do it. But also, and I would be more comfortable if I didn't have to be on the back of motorbikes, although that hip abduction does help my spine. But I do it because they are doing it to save my money. So this kind of thing that, you have to become in a certain way ready to learn from your mistakes, and they will perhaps surprise you sometimes by some kind of success, and you feel you've passed an exam. That's the way it is, my friend, VU. It's not like, sorry, there's no fit there. Therefore, Du Bois's idea was that all of those so-called fugitive slaves, the contrabands, it was a general strike. He changes Marx, calls that a general strike. They downed their tools, walked off, joined the Union Army. The Civil War changed. It became anti-slavery, whereas before it had just been to keep the Union together. So therefore, in this kind of a situation, you don't ask, why am I not haunted because it's feudality? You move them out of loyalty. You move yourself out of loyalty. Loyalty is, Marx's discussion of Robinson Crusoe. Loyalty is the general equivalent of feudalism. At any rate, so Professor Kaur, the knowledge, is knowledge a prerequisite of praxis? And the reason why I said practice was because I use the word praxis extremely rarely, because I think praxis relates to that theoria techne praxis triad, where praxis is a little bit different from what we mean. I'm not suggesting that you are doing this. You just asked a question, but I have a feeling that we should not use that word unless there is an absolute necessity, and perhaps there is in your case. I'm not at all criticizing, but the reason why I said practice, especially also because I also think about all of the substitutes in languages that I don't know, and a few languages that I do know, And the Greek word should not travel through all of these words, so all of these languages. But in knowledge, it's not, knowing is a kind of practice. Theorizing is a kind of practice. I would say that this binary opposition between knowing and doing is what you see, is knowledge a prerequisite? It happens before, and then you apply it to practice. This is not the way I teach so-called theory. I don't teach theory on the undergraduate level because I like to make them do theory and talk about what they're doing theoretically without actual theory words. And so that's a different thing. And at the end, in the colloquium, I say that, look, now you go forward because you did this and you did that. Imagine, I used to do this in Nepal, and there was a white guy, a white British guy, who turned around to me. I was paying his fare, I was paying his hotel, everything, bringing him from Colombia. He turned to me with his eyes like shooting colonial contempt and said, preaching bureaucratic egalitarianism, because I was speaking to two women and saying, don't read theory yet because you're doing something somewhat different. Don't begin to call it shamanism because everyone wants you to call it shamanism. And this guy says, you don't know how to give equal time to everyone. Bureaucratic egalitarianism. So to an extent, that's what you break down by undoing the binary opposition between knowing before and then praxis. You undo the opposition and you recognize that theorizing is indeed, knowing is indeed a practice. That's a halfway house. And now I take a word from Foucault's teacher, Kazim, who actually said it better than Foucault did, that practice norms theory, norms, N-O-R-M-S. Kazim called this polemical, fighting. Foucault changed this into political, which was different. But at any rate, Kazim, who had in fact been in a concentration camp. But at any rate, so therefore, it's a halfway house. And when you actually are in the field of so-called action, you actually are not, you've made this theorizing part of your mental furniture. This is literary reading of theory, not thinking, how am I going to apply this in praxis? So it becomes part of your mental furniture, so that in fact, when you are so-called practicing, at the end of the day, it's fieldwork without transcoding. At the end of the day, when I sit down with Anirban Bhattaji, for example, we talk, and always Surya, we talk about what the so-called practical work, which is sinking and swimming, trying to learn from below, what the practical work resisted in the theory. That is norming. So that relationship is not one of a binary opposition. It is one where theory and practice are complicit, folded together in a halfway house. The theorizing, to recognize theorizing by these so-called landless illiterate crowd is hard, because it's not wearing a three-piece suit. But that is also something that one should think about. I mean, what they're doing, what is it? What can I learn? So anyway, I'm taking a long time answering questions, but I said I would. Okay, so give me some more.
Yeah, we are loving it, Gayatri. There is one from Malaika, and she writes, what is the active participation in practical life that students and scholars of social science and humanities can work towards, especially in India with regard to diversity?
Very straightforward question. Okay, another one.
There is another one by Nupur Sethi. I thank you so much. I would love to understand your perspective from being and becoming. How do you see it as a learner? Is it important to constantly become and transform oneself from being better of what one is?
Okay.
There is one from Suprabhat Seva. Historically, Suprabhat Seva.
Seva,
Historically,
yeah.
yes, historically and contemporary politics in Bengal regards to Gorkha communities has always diverged from multiculturalism narrative, and the politics of recognition has still been lacking. Now that BJP seems to be a greater force rising, what could be our destiny, the people of Bengal and Gorkhas collectively?
Yes. Okay, let's go here, Malaika. You know, my real answer here is I don't know, because it seems to me if I you know, I think of my teaching as a kind of I've actually written about this, you know, the rearrangement of desire, right? Uncoercive rearrangement of desire, humanities teaching. You really need to know the person well. I'm unable really to give advice. It's good that you ask, but I'm unable to give you advice. I can't even see your face. So I don't know anything about you. So in the humanities teaching, it's both one-on-one. That's the way you build collectivity in humanities teaching. It's a hard thing to do, one-on-one. And this is why all of the so-called great revolutions have failed, because they could not go toward everyone. It was not possible. It was not possible. And you know, if you read the work of Theodor Shanin, you will see that he actually really writes about how revolutions break because each individual that is not approached. This is a very long-term goal, but history is long. So therefore, the idea of how can you participate, actively participate in social work, you will, first of all, either I will have to know you much better, or you will have to do what I said, I think, to Akmal, that you will have to make people, other people, feel that you are ready to be useful, that you're not just talking the talk. Because boro boro kotha bola soja is what one of the primary school teachers said to Pratichi Foundation. It's easy to talk big. Boro boro kotha bola soja. So therefore, it's and I sometimes say to my students whom I know, go look for demonstrations. And they may be dangerous, in which case, if you want to avoid danger, by all means avoid danger. I'm not interested in saying, oh, you must really fight to the death. I respect people who are like that. But, you know, I don't want to die. So therefore, I mean, even at 79, মরিতে চাই না আমি সুন্দর ভুবনে. So, so therefore, the thing is that on the other hand, if you join a couple of demonstrations, it may be a way of finding out what it is. You will make connections, networking, but I can't give you an abstract answer. How can someone within a university? I need to know you more. And I hope I will. I'll remember your name, Malaika. Okay, Nupur. Yes, becoming is not something, once again, as I was saying to the first question, you see, I'm thinking of you again as Meenakshi. I really mustn't. Okay, you know, as I was saying to Manisha, you know, you can't avoid avoid diversity. You can't avoid becoming. I mean, this is just a fact of life. And what you are talking about, and this is a very important question you have asked, you are talking about becoming as event and becoming as task. They're two different things, okay? Becoming as event uses your body, your mind, your, you know, the cellular formation inside your brain. I mean, you know, my short-term memory is much worse than it was, let's say, 15, 20 years ago. See, that's a kind of becoming also, you know, moving towards death. But on the other hand, there is also becoming as a task. You know, how can I understand what the task is to give the last lecture. How can I be honest? How can I speak the truth, whatever the truth might be, quote unquote, to show how my truth is produced? That's becoming as a task. So it seems to me that that's my perspective, that the way I become as a passageway for DNA, I can't, that's planetarity. I have no control over it, none. So, on the other hand, that does not mean that I cannot, however wrongly, also think it's always wrong because it's based on the grounding error of a very fragile thing called reason. That's our best, the best thing we have. We have to protect it because it's fragile. And in fact, to think it's the best thing is an error. But so therefore, you think this one through because you've asked a good question. This is for you to think. Becoming as event and becoming as task. All right. Now, I wrote a piece, in fact, Capitalism, the Capital Volume 1 is Event and Task, in a book edited by Peter Osborne, the radical philosophy guy, Osborne. And take a look and tell me what you think. Okay. And then Suprabhat Seva. I'm with you. I think, and this is something that I do say to my workers, that you have to really now think about people who are completely unlike you. That's democracy. Equality, that's how you think equality, not just for your own group. You see, there, Mahashita Di, whom I really feel a great deal of affection for, but they made a mistake in taking each little, tribal group and making little shomitis, Shabor Kollan Shomiti and Dhekaru Samaj Kollan Shomiti. No, then I say to them, I could just as well do a Brahman Kollan Samaj, etc. No, we are not, we are poor Indians. We are not just Dhekarus and Shabors and Khairas and Mahals and Bagdis and Baulis. No, we are not just that. So therefore, this is a problem, my dear Suprabhat, as you well know. There has to be, we have not been good at all with welcoming the Gurkha as part of us, and there is therefore a kind of, everything is complicit, because if you behave pushing away, the behavior that you get is also pushing away. So here, I think, and you've asked your question in the correct way. You haven't asked me, how can we? Of course, I don't know how we can. All I can do is to try, see, this general will for social justice is try to teach these characters that the way they are going is not the only way. And they're doing that in terms of the farmers' strike. I've written about this in a piece that's going to be coming out in a volume for Japan International, where they wanted me to talk about the heritage of postcoloniality. And I said, the heritage of postcoloniality for a citizen like me is not very positive. So this, therefore, I would say that I share this problem with you. I am not active in it because I'm not, you have to focus when you are really trying to be active. This is also an answer to Nupur and Malaika. You have to focus. You're only one person, which is why one must look forward to a collectivity. And I will not forget your name. See, this is what I can say. I'm with you, but I'm not focused on this. So therefore, the focus has to come from you. Thank you very much for your question, because this is a denial of diversity.
Thank you, Gayatri. A couple of more questions here. Some of them are really interesting. And here I go for you. Saraswati ji, is it like trying to change the experience? Okay, 1 minute. Where did it go? Is it like trying to change the experience from what it is believed to be true from real?
Okay.
Okay. There is one from Sanika Sarode. You are considered among one of the foremost thinkers in the world today. Can you tell us about your evolution intellectually and as a person who went to America so young, and some advice for young students?
Who went to what?
To young students.
No, before that, who went
to America so young. So some advice for young students. And there is one from Professor Arvinder Ansari, who's right here with the panel of our department. We listen to diversity, we appreciate diversity, but in current socio-political culture, diversity is becoming thing of past. How can we reclaim plural spaces within brackets composite culture, where I don't have to think I'm a Sikh, Muslim, or Hindu?
Yeah. Well, Saraswati ji, I will say that, I'm really repeating myself because that is all I know. I will say that I'm really not very interested in understanding my experience correctly from what I take to be true and then the real. This is an important step for sure, but that is again not my focus. That's why I said to you, you do it. I can just tell you what I think, and what I think is, of course, what I like to think, isn't it? That's why I said Taruk Babu had taught us that the text, my own text included, is my desire. But the article, it's there like a paraf, it's there like a watermark. You know, you've seen that, you know, there can be a thing across the page which says draft. It's a watermark, right? So, but it's not a signature. So therefore, I am certainly taught some things about my experience, but it is taught since I am a humanities teacher, it is taught in terms of how to access the other. You know, that's where, see, right at the beginning, when I started the schools, I mean, in 84, 86, those years, I thought that all human beings were capable of free thinking. You know, the nice middle class assumption of equality. I very soon found out that this was completely historically determined. You say free thinking, all that my students were doing was saying 4 feet, 1 tail, etc. They could not, in fact, and at one point, Baby Bauri wrote, I was asking, an elephant had come and I was asking them to write about what it was like, the elephant. And so she misspelled. I never correct them for spellings if the sound has been correct. Spelling time will come. You know, it's word making spelling, isn't it? Banan, banano. So so she wrote elephant, ELEFANT, exclamation point, free thinking. You know, she couldn't do anything, class 3 or 4, I forget. She couldn't really write anything free, but there it was, she'd done something. So therefore, I learned something certainly about myself there. And you know, this business of inalienable human rights, that's of course a mistake. There ain't any inalienable human rights. And you know, when the human rights folks are behaving toward these very poor people, they don't train them into the subjectship of human rights, which belongs to the bourgeois revolution, the French Revolution. And so that it looks like the tyrant giving top-down philanthropy, you know, raising the salary of the rural police, and these human rights folks coming and giving them things. So to an extent, I have learned these things, but it isn't because my focus was on learning how to understand my experience. I find that advice which I used to give before I entered the world of work, unlearn your experience, a bit narcissistic, if I may say so. And then the how intellectual, You see, I went to the United States. I told you why I went. I gave you my story. I didn't want to go see, I didn't want to go to Britain because I felt that I would have to take a second BA, and I did not want, I thought that was a very racist thing. I mean, I didn't have anyone to give me advice because I couldn't tell anyone anything because I didn't want to hurt my mom. I even told my mom a lie that I had received a Metropolitan scholarship because I borrowed from the managing director of the Metropolitan Insurance Company, DNB, or something Bhattaji, whom I had heard of. He went to jail for embezzlement later, but he did a good thing for me. But I had heard that he was a quote philanthropist, unquote, English word I heard. And so I went to his office day after day after day with no appointment until finally he couldn't understand why this person was there every day. And so he called me in. So, that is really not going to America young. Young I was because I received 2 double promotions in school, war years, who was noticing? So I went from KG1 to KG3, and I went from class 3 to class 5, so that I never learned the history of India, which was in class 4. Okay, so therefore, that's that. So I was young. I passed my matric, which is class 10, when I was 13 years old. And so I entered college, right? So therefore, I was young because I was young. I didn't think of myself as young. I thought I was the same age as everybody else. And most of my classmates were older than I. But it equals out. Now I'm older than everybody else. But at any rate, so I went to the United States, not America, by the way. I went to the United States so young because of this particular problem that I had. I read what I had written about the university. Who wanted to go? And then, so why did I go to Cornell? Because I knew Harvard, Yale, Cornell, and I thought Harvard and Yale were too good for me. So, I mean, I was so stupid that I didn't even go to, I knew this guy, Banerjee, I used to debate with him, Shukriya Banerjee, that he was at USA, etc. I could have gone to him. It didn't occur to me. So therefore, I telephoned, I booked a trunk call. I called Cornell saying, I'm a very good student. I don't need financial aid because I had borrowed money. I mean, my teachers still laughed about the fact that nobody had ever been. This is why I didn't take any of the graduate tests, because this is how I got in. So you see, it was really not something that I can give you as advice. It happened to me because I wrote the damn editorial. Okay, I don't know whether Taruk Babu was right or wrong. Maybe I would have got a first class in my MA. But in those days, with the whatchamacallits, I had no money. But with the 5-year plans, shipbuilding and so on and so forth, if you didn't have a first class in art subjects, you couldn't even get a damn passport unless you could pay for your travel. So therefore, I had to go. So what advice would I give you, dear? The only advice as I can give you is follow your nose, be brave, and and do your thing. Don't forget that your parents will come around. Because you see, I told my mother this lie, but the moment I got to the United States, I said, Ma, I told you lie, Ma, I borrowed money. It'll be okay. Don't worry about it. And I must say, my mother, she was something else. I wish I could go on about her. But any rate, so that's my advice. I'm sorry that isn't very good advice, but you see the point. Okay, so about this business of how shall one claim diversity, whether you're a Sikh or I mean, that's what I said. When it comes to violence, vigilantism, it's not all the rules change. How? I do not know how. I am, I am my colleagues, my Indian NRI. I'm not an NRI, right? As I said, but my NRI colleagues are afraid to enter into an online discussion. So, to an extent, what can I tell you? I must say that I have talked a great deal to my supervisors and teachers about the Sikhs in terms of the farmer strike. And I have also said that they have gone beyond the identity of being Sikhs. And I have really talked about it also on Anandabazar Patrika in Bengali in a conversation with Sugata Ghosh. And I got many reactions there from people saying, let us have more conversations from you, Didi. But at the bottom, and if Anirban is in the audience, he's my associate, Anirban Bhattaji, a fantastic associate, I must say. If he's there, then he will know that, you know, I really try to interest them in learning from this strike and speaking to the lowest of the low farmers in a way, and this is happening, and you know, not in terms of what it really is, we're giving it into globalized capital, but you know, what Marx calls primitive accumulation, capitalization of land. But so that, you know, you don't need factories. Capitalization of land will then lead into industrial capitalism. That's what primitive accumulation is. So, but they can't say that to the poorest of the poor, illiterate villagers who are farmers. And so I say, I who am against identity politics, Bangla Bachao, that's the only thing that will work for them. You make mistakes when you need to. So, and this is happening. Bangla Bachao is happening. And so there again, the Sikhs and the farmer strike. There is a way in which, I mean, what is there? You know, I read that Gurmukhi thing translated by a friend of mine. But what is there in that Gurmukhi stuff? Their thing is Dilli Chalo. Chalo Dilli, which used to be against the colonizers, right? And they now know that the enemy is within. So what can I do? I can only admire from a distance and say that when there is violence, I'm afraid too. Everyone is afraid. It's a culture of fear. So thank you again for saying these important things to which there is really no answer but just thinking together.
Oh, thank you so much. Should I take two more, Gayatri? We are just loving those conversations and your childhood experiences also. Should I take two more, or do I call it quits?
Well, it is up to you, you know. Because
okay. So no, we would love to your views on it. There are two more questions here. One by Suneha. She writes, politicization of diversity, especially ethnic diversity, can cause social conflicts which can result into the fragmentation of society. What are the other possible outcomes of politicization of diversity? And how can we preserve the losing identity of the diversity?
Okay.
Okay, there is one from our student, Garima Dhankar. A man, what's your opinion on non-binary genders and new pronouns that are being, sorry, I lost it. I lost it. What's your opinion on new non-binary genders and new pronouns that are being used now and situation of LGBTQIA plus community in India?
Okay, I'm going to get something out of here.
Sure.
Okay. Okay, so the first question, you know, this horror of someone who does not resemble me, it's an affect which is a big human affect. It's, you know, fear of the other who doesn't resemble me. It's not just today. So to an extent, its politicization is also not just today. The thing is that today, because of digitality, this politicization has become unbelievably effective, just as its questioning can also be effective. So it seems to me that you can't And as for losing identity, that is not just a result of the politicization of diversity. That's also a result, and this is something that I was talking about in the English department event, where I also gave the last speech, valedictory speech. It is also uh, the loss of the possibility or of the desire of learning languages. See, when I was at Presidency College, we certainly did not have any opportunity of learning languages. But I did go, you see, I was doing my five tuitionis, but nonetheless, I was making a good deal of money actually. My mother never told me. But so I did go to the Alliance Française, and I did, in fact, follow French for one semester only. That's all the French I've had, but I did do it. And I learned some German from very, very prejudiced, caste prejudiced German wife, Irmgard Bhaduri, of a Bengali widow, Bengali freedom fighter, and she taught me Zeit ist Geld, etc. She taught me 3 months for 3 months German when I was 13. And now I learned Chinese. I've been learning Chinese for 12 years. I learned some Arabic, and unfortunately, I did not learn Fusha, and therefore it went off. I learned Maghrebi Arabic when I was working in the Maghreb, and so I had to run off in 1991 finally, in 93. And so it would seem to me that one way of losing identity is this absolute stopping of the desire to, let me see who's there. Okay. Okay, so the absolute desire to not learn languages or read everything in English translation. Remember, that's where I began, our impoverished discourse, because we are taking English as unmarked. So that is also a business, and I know that this language learning is much hampered here in India because of demand and supply, allocation of resources, etc. It's not simple. But so therefore, the politicization of diversity is old, but today it can be much broader. And losing identity is part of it, is because, see, you don't learn a culture, you learn a language. Then you enter the lingual memory of the language. I mean, Marx described revolutionary practice as learning a foreign language so well that when you're using the foreign language, you don't constantly translate back into your mother tongue. It's 18 Brumaire. That's how he describes revolutionary practice in terms of foreign language learning. So I would say that that's part of something. And Garima, I have talked about the trans subject as really making us understand the phenomenality of the subject of democracy. And I've written about this. Is a complicated topic, and I've written about this all over the place. But I mean, the reason why I went and got this journal, I would recommend that you take a look at a wonderful interview by Anne Berger, okay? Anne Berger it's a long interview. Let me see. It's called Live Body, an interview with Anne-Emmanuelle Berger, and it's in Parallax, a journal called Parallax 91. There's a lot of nonsense about Derrida in this journal, in this issue, but Anne is truly smart, and the way she analyzes the relationship between the use of gender diversity by capitalism is extremely fascinating. At the same time as one acknowledges that the trans subject is indeed, and transphobia and all of that stuff, that indeed does make us rethink the democratic subject as normal. Generally, I mean, what's happening in the United States, voter registration against voter registration, right? Voting rights. So that normally it's the nice, person who has property, middle, etc., etc. This, so therefore, or that democracy is nothing but voting. Democracy is arithmetic, body count. This is something that the trans subject questions. But nonetheless, I think to look at a really wonderful critical discussion, you should look at what Anne Berger says in parallax number 91. Okay? All right, so that's it then.
Yes, one last question, Gayatri Di. This is from a close friend, Professor Tapan Mohanty. How do you perceive the coexistence of spirit of globalization transcending cultures for consumption and the presence of extreme nativism and subnationalism?
Yes, well, I do. It is one of those broad questions, and it's the last question. So, Tapan Mohanty actually knows the answer. So, therefore, I'll just kind of, speak in that kind of way. Well, everybody knows that globalization actually could take off because of the silicon chip. Marx wrote that capital would circulate at the speed of mitgedankenschnelle. It would circulate at the speed of thought if it could. And the silicon chip goes much further than the speed of thought. Our head computer is nothing compared to the silicon chip. So therefore, okay, globalization of capital, boom. Now, globalization of capital, now that's the abstract as such. Okay, Professor Mohanty, I'm just like, saying something that you and I can do in shorthand, right? So the capital is the abstract as such. Capitalism codes it so that it can succeed. So, and after all, what is socialism? Is after all agreeing that yes, some surplus must be produced, and part of the surplus must be used for the good of the society. I mean, it's very simple. Capital. I say to my teachers all the time, "Punji bhalo, punji bad kharap." That's the thing. I mean, it's not romantic anti-capitalism. So, to an extent, the globalization can survive if ideologically it encourages subnationalism. I mean, this is not even just globalization. There is a book by a guy called Buell. I now forget, the word native is in the title. I forget the title. Du Bois reviewed it, where he actually cites examples how imperialism in Africa encouraged separate ethnic identities so that they could not think Africa in any kind of pan-African way, and they still can't. So to an extent, that is how I explain it. I mean, as you explain it too, I'm sure, that it globalizes global capital, the absolute abstractions. I mean, not just finance capital. I mean, even agriculture has been financialized, the financialization of the globe. But now, I mean, all the cloud economies, stuff that's never realized. It's the whole situation is so different, and the factory floor pulverized. It's so in that situation, of course, they need these old-fashioned subnational identitarianisms so that can occupy us. And that's how I would answer that question between two people who can actually share this shorthand description. Thank you for at least asking it. And that's why I say to people like my very dear friends Jaspreet Bouar and Patricia Clough, when they talk about revolution, they should realize that what they have to learn is the how capital can be regulated rather than talk revolution without any idea of how we are complicit with, how we are subsumed by, how we are outside in the funding machine.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Gayatri Di. Now I invite Tripathy Ghosh. He's one of our research scholars in the department who admires you tremendously to give her vote of thanks. Tripathy, please.
Yes, ma'am. Vinamra Pranam, Gayatri Di. On behalf of Jamia Millia Islamia, a land of dreams or Dayari Shock, and its significant department of sociology, I express my heartiest thanks to our speaker, Professor Gayatri Chakravorty Spivak. Pranam Janman Gayatri Di, again. Your built-in optimism illuminated the fraternity. I extend my sincere thanks to the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Jamia Millia Islamia, Professor Najma Akhtar ji. My gratitude to Director of CIT, Mr. Kazim Naqvi ji, without whose support this session wouldn't have been possible. I precise thanks to respected Head of the Department of Sociology, Professor Manisha Tripathy Pandey, Professor Sabyasachi for conceptualizing, Professor Arvinder Ansari, the former Head of the Department of Sociology again, Professor Kulvinder Kaur, Professor Azra Abedi, Professor Sharina Banu ma'am for coordinating the lecture series, Dr. Sumbul Farhadi for writing the conceptual note, and all the respected faculties of the Department of Sociology, Jamia Millia Islamia. Warm thanks to all the office staff and their great energy. Imam sir, Vittal sir, thank you very much. Thanks to all the scholars and students.
I think there is some.
And all the participants who joined in. ভালো থাকবেন গায়ত্রী দি, প্রণাম জানবেন। আপনি হলেন দুঃসাহসী বিন্দু, সেই ভালোবাসা জানবেন, প্রণাম জানবেন, এইটুকুই বলতে পারি।
অত প্রণাম এখন হচ্ছে এলবো শেক, অত প্রণাম করে লাভ।
আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, ভালো থাকবেন।
আচ্ছা,
thank you Gayatri di, absolutely incredible, we all just loved it. Thank you, and we invite you again please. Thank you.
It was very instructive for me. Thank you, Vice Chancellor. Really, your work in education is an inspiration for the whole university. Thank you, Manisha. Thank you for the questions. Most instructive. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.